surprised you don't have disapproval, and the third will go down a little when you do a man on Mars, but it does give you a lot of political power points. Army seems to stabilize around 5, so I guess I can't get up to 7, which means I can't rush the end of the Afghan war. Next best thing to do is to do military, then to increase resource extraction, because it'll reduce disapproval if you give military to a country. Getting Basu. This is an authoritarian pro-Soviet regime. You didn't necessarily see socialist government in all the countries that are pro-Soviet. Some people say left-wing is authoritarianism. Not exactly. That's not an accurate description of what the Marxist-Leninists did, but there were absolutely left-wing authoritarian regimes that weren't Marxist in a real sense, but were left-wing, that were allied with the Soviets. Military aid, resource extraction, Senegal. Boom. So that disapproval is at 66. It should be too high. Suriname. Brazil. It's about resource extraction in Brazil. Now I did overcommit to supporting Venezuela and undercommit to Haiti. I think Haiti could have been brought in the Comic-Con, and Venezuela could have been a country where I could do resource extraction instead. But whatever. Military aid to Peru. So I've checked, it doesn't seem that military aid reduces your political power income. Just, of course, makes your military temporarily weaker. Boom. Trade to Argentina. Guess the network of Soviet bases throughout the world will grow. Military aid to Chile. Tools, military aid actually. Resource extraction buoys. Interesting to see if some random country somewhere flips, showing that it can happen. The kind of disapproval ratings have been keeping in the 50s and occasionally up as high as 60. Over 60, there's almost certainly a small chance of a flip. Costa Rica. Resource extraction. It's a country rich in natural resources which are being used to fuel the socialist project. With additional technology, nuclear tech to make nuclear reactors cleaner, better. Civil tech, computerization, increase luxury goods, and competitiveness. Takes a lot of computerization to improve luxury goods in a substantial amount. Healthcare, at least for roleplay reasons, that's a good thing. I'll do more in nuclear tech. This environment score is probably hardly maxed either. Oh, it is actually. That can't allow me to trim environmental support. Da, 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 da. Been underfunding housing. Let's put a little into that. People have, better housing. In fact, I could do bigger increase. Boom. Need more money in the state mechanism with all those funding increases. More special services to reduce corruption. Well, or it might reduce corruption as well. Probably doesn't very much. So just the expenses, increase army recruitment, and the rest will go to the reserves, I guess. If you start spending too much relative to reserves, you start getting inflation, which reduces your income. Some resource extraction, Niger. This music sounds almost like the music in Dwarf Fortress at times. It's more style, even though not even the same language. I don't know. It's weird they know. Oh, resource extraction, Liberia. CS probably would have gone isolationist earlier if I'd had the reserves to, in event, could have brought Mexico in as my ally instead of it going pro-US. That would have been a huge blow. And of course, India joined the Comic-Con and China becoming pro-Soviet can both be huge blows, but I've had a ton of trouble making friends with China. You know what? Let's increase diplomatic missions. Do something about that. And friendship with China if US doesn't go isolationist now, or doesn't get the event where they choose Trump or Paul anyways. Maybe I can prove things with China, we'll see. Would be nice. Resource extraction, Botswana. And Mozambique. Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia. I'm sure there's a country somewhere I'm missing. There's always something I miss. Probably Papua New... Nope, not Papua New Guinea. Oh, Tunisia. Here we go. Let's see. Oh, I still have the political power to do a bit more. Morocco. Okay, to Burkina Faso, long-time ally. Temporarily had the assassination of Traore, or whatever. Shoot. Can't get any more political power. Oh well. Guess could have gotten a little more resource extraction, but got something, I guess. Built up the reserves to absurd levels, too. Arabic Spring. Oh, you get this event when the US becomes weak enough. After things the Arabs did to us in the 80s, we just have to strike back. Advisors suggest one of the following actions for the victory. Finance left opposition, or begin armed invasions from Maoist lands, or you can do both. Which, pretty sure how aggressive you are here determines how many countries you get in your in the Comic-Con, or whether they're just allies of Comic-Con. Or you can do nothing. We can't get them away. Raise the finance opposition and do armed invasions. During smooth actions, Arab Spring was successful. The whole Arabian Peninsula is now with us. It might also determine the chance of success. It just finds the opposition might just make countries neutral or something. Anyways, this gives me control of, and Yemen gets united, and in the Comic-Con. And these countries, being in the Comic-Con, dramatically raises oil prices. Want me to increase production. Because they're not they're not producing more oil than is actually beneficial for them because of US pressure. Which is something that historically happened. These countries would overproduce oil. Let's do diplomatic missions, since Rise in DEFCON would force a detente, which actually is most expensive for how it soaks up political power points. In exchange for the excessive production of oil, these countries would get civil and military aid, so the US would sell them weapons, military aid, at often prices that are less than the price of production, and provide development assistance, i.e. civil aid, in this game's terms. So it wasn't like they got nothing for it, but it was definitely a strategy to undercut the Soviets, who were a net exporter of oil. Knowing that the Soviet economy was fairly fragile, because it was trying to win a Cold War with a nation that started off much wealthier than the Soviet Union. The GDP per capita of the US when the Soviet Union first formed was 13 times as high. 13 times as high, and GNP per capita had been even more dramatically different because there were still a lot of foreign-owned businesses in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union first formed before those companies were nationalized. So GNP capita was like 1/16th or something. That's an enormous economic gap. By the time the Soviet Union collapsed, at about 55% the GDP per capita of the US. It had been make up ground. By about 2070, it would have eventually surpassed the size of the US economy. Which, I mean, China did it much earlier in our own world, but China also has 3 times the population of the US. So having a larger economy still is only a third the GDP per capita. The Soviets would have had actually a smaller population than the US, but a larger GDP by the year 2070. That's very slow progress, because even as the Soviet economy grew, the US economy continued to grow. Can't just be like, oh, well, it shouldn't take that long to reach the size of the US economy in this year. No, it doesn't, but the US continues to grow the whole time, so it's a moving target. To exceed it, you have to grow faster. And it would have done that. I mean, it was. The long-term GDP growth rate, GDP per capita growth rate of the Soviet Union was higher than that of the US. Partly because a lot of resources, not much was invested in providing for people's consumer goods and such. In game terms, not much was invested in light industry, and more was invested in heavy industry, which would be a determinant of GDP partly in this game. It determines exports, which give you money. Of course, this game caps out, like, I can't invest more in heavy industry and get more money. It caps out this level. But realistically, GDP can go much, much higher than what you can reach in this game. So yeah, the Soviets invested very heavily in heavy industry and scientific development. Science, of course, can improve productivity, and did. And so their tech and heavy industry, they were outgrowing the US, even though their investments were actually less efficient, because socialism does lead to less efficient investment of resources, but also leads to more efficient distribution of resources, which is to say, instead of a handful of billionaires having ridiculous yachts, you get people's basic needs like food, housing, healthcare met more consistently, which, $1 spent on housing for a person who's barely surviving makes a much bigger difference in their welfare than $1 spent on a slightly bigger yacht for a billionaire. So the money that is spent on people's standards of living goes further under socialism. And because of that, you can actually afford to put fewer resources into standards of living and still have the same level of overall happiness and human development for less spending, because socialism is better at that aspect of the economy. And that allows greater investment in heavy industry and science, even though the investment yields lower returns. And so that's how socialist countries tend to outgrow capitalist ones, through larger amount of investment, but the investment being less efficient. But quantity has a quality all of its own, which is to say, you can just, through sheer force of will, make up for less efficient investment, and that's what socialist countries do if they want to outgrow capitalist ones, is they spend much more on economic development. And the difference in investment efficiency isn't that great. Economists estimate the U.S. had, during the Cold War, investment efficiency, the money that was spent on actual economic growth, around 96%, which is to say 100% would be perfect investment, all money spent the most optimal way possible. The Soviet Union had 93 or 92%. So it's not a huge difference, actually, just slightly less efficient. Whereas again, stuff like making sure everyone had housing, instead of putting more money into luxury housing for very few, did more to, doing more military aid. The army is spread too thin around the third world. Should increase the weapons and equipment budget a little, because this should lead to a large army. Soldiers' living expenses has a smaller effect, but some. You want to ramp stuff up slowly, but what's that? And then the rest are reserves. Starting to get some inflation, which limits me spending more. Anyways, everything is quiet, except the U.S. citizens' contentment is 0. Army power is 2 and communist 3. Relations are not improving with China despite high spending on diplomatic missions, though.